rings culture has taken over sport in the last few years. Great players are no longer judged by what they do, but quite often by the situation that they find themselves in. Cricket has always been a team sport where we can actively track the individual, so there's always been elements of this within the sport, but it seems to have gone to a whole different level of recent times. Lionel Messi and Sachin Tendulkar are two of the greatest players of all time. That's without question, right? But they had not won a World Cup till 2022 or 2011. But they weren't actually better players because they won those trophies. They would have been the exact same level of athlete even if they hadn't have got to that. And that's the bit that people just no longer even factor in. Virat Kohli was the player of the T20 World Cup in 2014 and 2016, but India lost both times. You can make a very good argument that India ran into a great Sri Lankan side in conditions that certainly suited them, and the West Indies side that they played were in the middle of dominating T20 cricket. But that is not how fans see these things. Even in the IPL, Kohli has a record-breaking season in 2016 where he scores 973 runs in a single season. They were so close to winning the final, but they ended up just short. And in the 2022 World Cup, he was the top run getter again, and they lost again. For years, Kohli was the best player on his team, yet he didn't have a title to show for it. Yes, he was an ODI World Cup winner at 22, and also won the Champions Trophy at 24. But not when he was the main man. So despite having some very crucial contributions over the time, especially in those two finals, people kind of kept downgrading him because he didn't have the big trophy. And so when India started losing, Kohli actually became the main scapegoat for that. And there is obviously sometimes some issues with the way he bats in T20 cricket. But let's be honest, Kohli was still one of the best players in the world, and most other teams would have picked him as well. And his ODI exploits are like top 4 ever, and maybe even higher than that. So this recent World Cup final is a little bit like Kumar Sangakkara in 2014. The Sri Lankan great top scored in the 2009 final, but with little help from anyone else. Similarly, Kohli's effort in 2014 ended up in a losing cause against Sri Lanka, who also broke a string of losing finals. And the parallels don't actually stop there, because Sangakkara had 19 runs in 4 innings before the final in 2014, and Kohli had 75 in 7 this year. And they both ended up performing in the World Cup final when their team needed it the most. The visuals of Kohli and Rohit Sharma with the trophy reminded a lot of people, and we've already mentioned it here before, of Sangakkara and Jarrod in 2014. This was the win that young India needed. Virat Kohli is now an unquestionable great to a lot of people who were doubting him right up until that final. But here's the truth. Virat Kohli is no better because he won that trophy. And even if he didn't, he's still a hugely important player in the short history of international T20 cricket. Kohli has been at the heart of this format pretty much since the start. You might want to go on the attack against trolls of your favorite player, but to do that, you need a good defense, and we choose NordVPN. They are our protection against cyber cutters or when some board has geo-blocked a great clip. NordVPN will help you get through the straight bat of any rights restrictions so that you can watch all the cricket you want. Protect your computer like the fastest, nastiest, scariest bowler in the world is coming for it with NordVPN today. That's nordvpn.com/KIMBER. Go Nord today. The IPL obviously dominates a lot of discourse around Virat Kohli when it comes to his T20 batting. The fact that he's been unable to win an IPL title keeps building up that pressure. But we obviously need to make a clear distinction between his IPL form and his T20 international batting numbers. He has a true average of 11 and a true strike rate of 2 in the IPL, making him a slightly above par player consistently, and then if you factor in the amount of runs, obviously he goes beyond that. There's absolutely nothing wrong with being an above par anchor type batter in the IPL over a long period of time. But in T20 internationals, he's an elite run accumulator who often puts pressure back on the opposition bowling attack. So he's actually a little bit more dynamic in the way he plays. And there could be technical reasons for that. He faces a lot more pace internationally than he does in the IPL, which suits his gameplay. In international cricket, he also has deeper batting lineups that give him some of the Evan Goldberg effect. You're going to have to go check old videos about Evan Goldberg. Although it is also worth mentioning that even with the impact sub rule in the last couple of IPLs, he is scoring quicker, but the entire league is scoring quicker. In general though, and we've talked about this a lot before this World Cup, internationals tend to be a lot slower than the IPL. especially World Cups. His true values in the IPL are lower because he plays his home games in the Chinnaswamy, which is obviously traditionally a fairly high and fast-scoring ground. We've also mentioned before on this channel that the extra pace under lights might actually help Kohli a little bit technically, though he is just much better at setting a target in blue than he is in red. But what makes him a standout player is his chasing, a true average of plus 40 and a strike rate of 18 in T20 internationals. While in the IPL, it's a true average of 12 with a true strike rate of 6. So clearly he enjoys chasing a lot more, like many limited overs batters do, because for him, it becomes an equation. All you have to think about is batting and reacting to the match. It takes away all the question marks about the other kinds of batting. And there was an interaction that he had with Tamim Iqbal, where he talks about how seeing the game through is an opportunity and not pressure. He talks him through his innings in Hobart in 2012, where they needed 321 in 40 overs, and that they approached that chase as 2 T20 matches. He also mentioned that growing up, whenever he watched India lose in a chase, he would go to sleep thinking that if he was there, he could have won it. It clearly really suits his psychology. That means that there is an element of him being extra motivated when he knows the target. And he says that chasing brings out the joy in him, which comes back to what we said before, that at that point, batting becomes its purest form to him. And as we often see with great players, in certain situations, they'll be at their absolute best because it also manages to help either their mental side of their game or the technical side of their game. Ben Stokes works at his absolute best when cricket requires one of his 3 gears: dead batting for a draw, the ODI middle overs accumulation, or T20 death hitting. Whereas Rohit Sharma is a much better player on tougher wickets because it almost seems to motivate him even more. Kohli has been not out in a successful chase 18 times in T20 internationals, and he scored over 50 in 11 of those, more than Dhoni and more than Karthik, although DK did not obviously play as many games. What separates him from those 2 other guys is that he is a top order player who is there all the way through till the end. Those are long innings that finish in glory. We remember them a lot. India has a win-loss ratio of more than 4 in the second innings in matches featuring him. They have never lost a T20 match when he was not out at the end of a run chase. So basically, if he's there at the end of a match, they're going to win the game. In the semi-final against South Africa in Mirpur, India needed him to get them over the line. At the other end, Ajinkya Rahane and Yuvraj Singh were scoring at almost a run a ball when the target was 173. Rohit at the start and Raina at the end played excellent cameos, but he's the one that of course goes on to finish the game. The highlight of his unbeaten 72 from 44 was the way he played only 3 dot balls. I think at his absolute best, that's his main skill. The man does not believe in dot ball. I was there in Eden Gardens when India were 23 for 3 against Pakistan while they were chasing 119 in 18 overs. They had been in a similar situation against the same team in the Asia Cup earlier that year, and it was Kohli who bailed them out of trouble that time. When I saw him do this at Kolkata, I wrote that he batted like he wasn't a carbon-based life form. And then I was also in Mohali. Again, India lost early wickets in a run chase in a must-win game that would take them to the semi-finals. And it was probably his best T20 innings. It was technical, it was flawless, it just was perfection watching him dissect the Australian fielding. And when he was batting with MS Dhoni, he was running between the wickets in such a brutal way, it might as well have been a Chris Gayle hit. And you could see that there is a pattern in how he batted in Mirpur and Mohali. He would rotate the strike in the middle overs, and even when wickets fell around him or the other batters at the end weren't quite going, he would wait until the last minute to unleash himself. That's a very traditional way of playing. That is the MS Dhoni or the Michael Bevan style, right? Taking it all the way to the end and then assuming you can catch up with boundaries. And you look at his true values by phases in T20 internationals, during the power play, he would often consolidate. Weirdly enough, he doesn't actually slow down as much in the middle overs for India compared to what he does in the IPL. But in the final overs, he would score at almost 2 runs a ball. And for years, that's what I've been talking about with Virat Kohli. He has the ability to score at 2 runs a ball. It's just that he holds it back a lot longer than most other players would. But that pattern makes sense now, doesn't it? And let's look at it by each over. We have to consider that Kohli has batted at 3 for most of his career, and he was above average in terms of speed only in the 4th and the 6th over of the power play. Until the 10th over, he has a positive true strike rate in only 4 of the overs, but after that, he's a plus in every single over. So he is the ultimate catch-up player in that sense. From the 16th over upwards, he flicks a switch, and realistically, this is the level that he could reach whenever he wanted to. because he is well above a true strike rate of 50 in the final 3 overs, which tells you that he is much more interested in making a lot of runs than he is going as quickly as possible. But even amongst anchor type batters, he's one of a kind at the end of games. So he could take the game deep like Dhoni or Bevan, but he then does it at a completely different level. If we break down Kohli's career in 20 innings blocks, his peak was quite early from innings 21 to 40. This includes the 2 T20 World Cups, where he was player of the tournament, and also an Asian Cup. And remember, bilaterals are not played all that frequently. In fact, for most players, I wouldn't even be that interested in T20 international stats. But in Kohli's case, he's now played so many and so many high-profile games that it is actually worth having a look at. And at no point in his career was he negative on either true average or true strike rate. The most interesting one here is certainly innings 81 to 100, because that actually coincides with his career worst form in general. But these also include 9 innings since August 2022, which was right after he took a 1-month break from the game. And we see a world of difference between the 2 time periods here. Not only was Kohli just about par in the IPL and below in ODIs on true average, he was also below par on true strike rate in both cases. In Test cricket, he had an average of 27 in this period. However, and I remember looking this up at the time, in T20 internationals, he had a true average of 20 while striking in almost 5 more than expected. So even in his form slump, when it came to T20 internationals, he always found a way to make runs. And compare that to how he came back after the break. He averages 35, yes, 35 more than expected in ODIs. In the IPL, his true average increases by almost 25 and a true strike rate of plus 10 as well. Even in T20 internationals, he had a better true strike rate, even though his true average actually had a slight decline. And in tests, he of course started to average 46 again, which is more where we expect him to be. His first innings was a T20 international against Pakistan in the Asia Cup. He was dropped when he was on naught off the second ball, but he would go on to score 35 off 34 while chasing 148. And you could see that he started to get in some batting rhythm, particularly against the quicks. His 71st international 100, which broke his 3-year drought, also came later on in that tournament. But wait a minute. You must be thinking, why have we not yet talked about Kohli's innings at the MCG, which of course I have done an entire video on once. In fact, I might have done an entire video on one shot. But that was an important innings in the context of his career, because India had lost to Pakistan for the first time in the T20 World Cup under his captaincy just before. This time, India were 31 for 4 in the 7th over of the chase. And remember, that was an absolutely batshit game all the way through. But he kept them alive and kept them in it. And eventually, when the fast bowlers came back, he was absolutely brilliant. When they needed 28 off 8 balls, he hit 2 sixes off Harris Ruff. The first one was a back foot straight drive off a hard length slow ball. That is basically the entire video I made. But speaking of T20 World Cups, here's a look at each campaign. He was very good in 2012. He had MVP tier seasons in 2014 and 2016, and he was the top run getter in 2022. He played only 3 innings, including a 2 not out against Scotland in 2021. So we have already talked about his greatest hits in the tournament. However, he was the player of the tournament twice, and yet India did not win. In fact, Kohli's innings, along with Rohit at Adelaide in 2022, was a reason why. And the truth is that he does play catch-up innings, and sometimes he doesn't catch up. This time was completely different. India had made a conscious effort to change how they played the format. And it started with the top. It's a bit like Joe Root and Bazball. It doesn't really work if your main batter says, I'm not going to do that. And so Virat Kohli attacked and attacked and attacked on dog shit pitches all the way through this tournament, and it meant that he didn't actually make any runs, right? He had 75 runs after 7 innings, but he showed that he was willing to play the team plan, which meant that he allowed for everyone else to play that style as well, especially because Rohit was actually doing it and successful. So the fact that he was willing to change the way he plays and not be afraid to fail was maybe even more important to India's overall campaign. Didn't stop the fact that he got out to attacking shots most of the time. But before the final, Coach Rahul Dravid summed it up very well by saying that when you play a high-risk brand of cricket, there will be times when it comes off and times when it doesn't. And we had already seen him in the second part of the IPL work out that this is where the game was going and that he needed to catch up. He was slog-sweeping spinners and hitting sixes like we'd never seen before in the power play. And I think the important aspect for him is he was trying to make as many runs as possible and keep the lineup together. Suddenly, he's in a slightly different role and he was recognizing that failure was okay. The game was changing and Virat Kohli was changing. And that's what the great players do. And come the final, the first over was exactly how he would have wanted to play and what India asked for him. He hit 3 half volleys for 4s in the first 5 balls. But India then lost another 2 wickets in the next over, and then another in the 5th. So ultimately, he went back in his shell. And again, that's why you want a great player who can attack and can go back and bat in that style, because he has 2 skills to his bow. This new way of playing has actually evolved Virat Kohli into a more important T20 player. And let's be honest, this was not his best innings. No one has any problem with him going back a little bit into his shell from overs 5, 6, 7, and 8. But with a long batting lineup, India got back ahead of that innings, and instead of cashing in, Kohli kept chipping the ball around. And eventually, I have deemed this Schrodinger's Kohli. His innings would be looked at differently had they not won. There is no doubt about that. He would have been the scapegoat, despite the fact he still made the majority of the runs. And he's used to that because that's happened quite a bit in his career. So if India had managed to lose that game, which obviously they went very close to, Kohli is not seen as a winner, despite the fact that his batting would be no better or worse without that trophy. But that's not how it went. So Virat Kohli's international T20 legacy now has the silverware to go with all those great innings and those 2 massive tournaments that he played in. Greatness comes with a tax, and Kohli had been paying it for a very, very long time. Now he gets a chance to enjoy the glory. If you make any content, Minvo Pro is the tool for you. Take your long format content and cut it and slice it for social media. This AI inspired weapon will turn your one piece of work into so many clips. Try Minvo.pro now.